Hey guys, Sue's here. Welcome back to another Keto Dinner Ideas video. We film these every single week to give you a little motivation to get in the kitchen and get your keto meal prep on. We always try to cover 4 different keto recipes each week, and we would love to have you go ahead and hit that subscribe button and join our crew. Let's get into the video. First up this week, I made a Keto Crab Florentine Bake. So to start with, over medium heat in a kind of deep saucepan, I put 2 tablespoons of unsalted butter. And then to that, I added about a little more than a half a teaspoon of minced garlic. And I'm just whisking those together until the butter gets nice and melted. To that, I am adding a tablespoon of coconut flour and just whisking that until it turns into a roux. To that, I'm adding a half a cup of heavy cream, again whisking that in, and a half a cup of water, 2 tablespoons of just cooking white wine, and whisking that all together. Now I'm going to bring this up to a bubbling simmer and let it thicken some. To that, I'm adding 1/4 a teaspoon salt, 1/8 a teaspoon pepper, and just mixing that all in as the heat comes up. Once I get it nice and bubbling, I'm going to decrease the heat back down to medium and add a can of lump crab meat. This is a 6-ounce can. Make sure you get all your parchment pieces and everything out of it. And I'm mixing that in and adding 2 tablespoons of shredded Parmesan cheese. And this is thickening that up. Meanwhile, I took a 9-ounce box of spinach, thawed it, steamed it in the microwave, drained it, used paper towels to really squeeze out all of the excess moisture out of it, and then I just took an 8x8 glass casserole dish and mashed that spinach down into the bottom of it, almost like a crust, and I'm pouring my crab and cream mixture on top. And then, just because I couldn't pop this in the oven without putting cheese on top, that would just be very unsouthern of me, I did go ahead and add about a half a cup of shredded mozzarella cheese to the top of it, and then I popped the whole thing in the oven at 350, and I meant to cook it for 25 minutes, and then I cut the timer off and got distracted and cooked it at extra 5, and I am not angry at how it turned out. Look how yummy and brown and golden the cheese topping turned out from that extra 5 minutes of cooking. Here it is plated up. This is super delicious and stores and reheats well for the week. Next up, I made a Chori Pollo from I Breathe I'm Hungry. I will link her original recipe down below. So to start with, in a good-sized saute pan over medium-high heat, I just melted 2 tablespoons of butter, and then I'm adding a cup of sliced onion to that. And I am going to take this moment to go on a little bit of a rant, which I normally don't do on my channel, but since I'm going to caramelize these onions, it's a good time to go ahead and stick that in here. There seems to be some contention on my channel about whether or not you can have onions if you're following a keto diet, and absolutely you can have onions. You have to factor in the carbs for those in your macros, just like any other food you eat, but in my opinion, the nutritional value of the onions outweighs the little bit of carbs that they add to an entire huge dish of food. With that said, if you're just starting out on your keto diet, you may want to avoid them altogether, along with other higher carb vegetables like tomatoes, like red peppers, like green peppers, like green beans. I mean, so many of these things do have a higher amount of carbs, and I know like the first 2 months that I was following a keto diet and really trying to jumpstart ketosis for myself, I did avoid all of those foods until I got fat adapted. But again, measure everything, count everything, and guess what? Caramelizing them doesn't magically add sugar to them. They already have that natural sugar in them, and we are just browning it. It's a natural process. So while some of your nutrients might go away and diminish a little bit from the heat, it's not adding additional sugar. So there you go. PSA for today delivered. I cook with onions, and if you don't like them, you can leave them out and your food will probably be a lot blander. Now, as you can see, I'm popping the lid on there to help with the caramelization process, and here you go after they've cooked down some more. You do want to make sure you're turning your onions as you do this so they do not get burnt on you. Now, after I have them to the color and soft texture that I want, I am just going to remove these to a separate dish and stick those to the side. And then to that same pan, that still has some of those butter remnants in it, I'm going to add 3 chorizo links, and these are about 8 ounces, and I did go ahead and remove the casing off of each of them. It's super simple, just clip the ends and it peels back just like paper. And I'm using my handy dandy meat chopper upper. I always have linked in the description box to break that apart. And I'm just going to continue frying it till it's cooked down, and I'm removing it to a different separate dish, and I'm trying to leave as much of that excess grease from the chorizo in the pan as I can, because now I'm going to add some chicken to this. Now, this is 3 cups of shredded cooked chicken. As always, I just did this in my Instant Pot, and then I shredded it with a little hand mixer, and it takes like a half an hour to cook it in the Instant Pot, and then literally like a minute to shred it with a handheld mixer. Now I just have this in the saute pan over medium heat, and I am adding a seasoning combo to it of a half a teaspoon ground coriander, a half a teaspoon ground cumin, a half a teaspoon garlic powder, an eighth of a teaspoon salt, a fourth a teaspoon pepper, and then I'm also adding a half a teaspoon of chili powder. And just to clarify, it is the chili con carne seasoning blend chili powder that I'm adding to this. And I'm just mixing and cooking this up until my chicken gets a little crisper and all of the seasonings are well incorporated. Now I'm taking an oval casserole dish and just adding all of that chicken to the bottom of it. I did not grease my dish or anything. On top of that, I'm evenly spreading out the chorizo that we cooked up, adding my caramelized onions to the top of that. And then I am topping this with a cup of shredded Monterey Jack and cheddar cheese blend. You could definitely shred your own to decrease the carbs in this meal even more, but I went ahead and just used a Fiesta blend that I had in the refrigerator. And now I'm popping this into a 375-degree oven for 20 minutes. And here's what it looks like when it comes out. My husband specially requested this meal and even found this recipe himself. Here it is served up. This has a little bit of cilantro on top with some sour cream and some hot sauce. I think it would be awesome with some fresh sliced avocado, but I couldn't get my hands on any of that right this minute. This was delicious. My husband ate it up, and of course it's stored and refrigerated excellently. And it only has about 3 net carbs per 3/4 cup serving, even with the onions. Next up, I made these awesome Keto Sloppy Joes, and I served them on some soul bread sesame rolls that are from a recipe by the genius Carolyn Ketchum, and I'll link her original recipe. So to get started on those, I took some protein powder, a cup plus 3 tablespoons unflavored whey protein powder. This is the one I used. I'll link it down below. Then I took my other dry ingredients of 1.5 teaspoons baking powder, a half a teaspoon xanthan gum, a half a teaspoon garlic powder, a fourth of a teaspoon plus another eighth of a teaspoon salt, a fourth of a teaspoon baking soda, and a fourth of a teaspoon cream of tartar, and I just whisked those all together. Now in my mixer, I'm getting started with my other ingredients. I have 8 ounces of room temperature cream cheese, and I just creamed it together a little before adding 3 tablespoons of butter that I just melted on low on the stovetop, and then I'll let it cool down just a little before adding it to my mix. To that, I am adding a little bit of avocado oil, 2.5 tablespoons, along with 2.5 tablespoons of heavy whipping cream, and then I'm adding 2 eggs plus 1 egg white, and mixing that all together. Now for the dry ingredients, she does suggest folding this in by hand. I am adding all of them, and then I'm just going to use the fold feature on my mixer a couple go rounds just till it gets slightly that kind of crumbly doughy texture, and then I am going to go ahead and take it off and fold the rest in by hand. And I am doing this pretty gently, just trying to kind of mash in any chunks of cream cheese that didn't kind of mix together well. And I am using a Wilton brownie pan for this. I will link this down below. I love this. Did spray it with a little bit of olive oil cooking spray, and then I just distributed my batter evenly. And instead of using sesame seeds, I'm using everything but the bagel seasoning from Trader Joe's. It does have sesame seeds in it, but then it also has poppy seeds and other spices and stuff. And I'm just putting a pinch on each of those, and I'm popping those into a 325-degree oven for 30 minutes, just until they're brown on top. While those are cooking, getting started on my sloppy joes. So I decided to use ground pork for this recipe. So I'm taking a pound of that, breaking it up with my meat chopper upper, and While that's browning, I added a 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt and a 1/4 of a teaspoon pepper to that. And then I am also adding a 1/4 of a cup diced onion, or just shy of that. I actually used frozen onion for this that I thawed, and a little bit less than 1/2 cup of diced green pepper that was also frozen that I just thawed. After I get that all mixed in together, I'm adding 1 heaping teaspoon of minced garlic, and I'm also adding a 1/4 of a cup tomato paste, and then just mixing that in really well. To that, I'm adding 2 tablespoons of brown swerve and just breaking that down in there. This gives it that really good kind of little bit sweet, sticky kind of texture. To that, I'm adding a tablespoon of just regular yellow mustard, and then 2 teaspoons of red wine vinegar and 2 teaspoons of Worcestershire sauce, and mixing that all up. And I am doing all of this over medium heat. Now I'm adding 1 cup of beef broth, mixing that all together, and I'm gonna bring this back up to a really good bubbling simmer, and then turn the heat back down again to medium low, and just let that cook down about 15 minutes, and it did thicken right on up without adding any xanthan gum or anything to it. And here go my rolls out of the oven. These are so good. I always just store them in a little storage bag in the refrigerator when they're left over. And here it is plated up. And this is my husband's plate, so he has 2 of these. His macros are a little bit higher than mine. Could also put these over chaffles. I think that would be really, really good, and it would be even lower carb than this recipe. And to go with it, I just served it with some roasted sea salt kale chips. They're crispy. I actually buy those pre-made at Costco, and they are super good to go with the sandwich or something like this. Last up this week, we put together some Korean ground beef bowls. I just love the way these look and the way they tasted. So to a pretty large skillet, I added a couple tablespoons of olive oil, and then I'm adding, I'd say, about 2 cups of cauliflower rice. I just used frozen cauliflower rice, steamed it a little in the microwave, and then I'm just adding it to the pan. This is medium to medium high heat. To that, I'm sprinkling a little bit of sea salt and a little bit of ground black pepper. And I'm just going to fry this up for a few minutes in the oil, and then remove this to a separate dish. Now to the same pan, I added probably just another splash of olive oil, and I'm going to add a pound of ground beef, breaking it up again with the best $5 tool I ever bought. And while that's browning in a separate dish, I'm mixing together a 1/4 of a cup liquid aminos with a 1/4 a cup beef broth, 2 teaspoons of sesame oil, a 1/4 a teaspoon ground ginger, and a 1/4 a teaspoon of crushed red pepper flakes. And I'm just whisking that together until the seasonings are all well incorporated. And then going back to my stovetop, I'm adding salt to my beef. Added just shy of a 1/2 a teaspoon. Then I made a well in the middle of my ground beef, and to that I am adding 2 teaspoons of minced garlic. And I did just kind of let it sit in the hot pan for about a minute before mixing it all together in with the ground beef. And then I'm going to pour that little sauce seasoning mixture over the top of this, whisk it together, and then I'm going to bring up the heat a little to where it gets to a nice simmer before turning it back down, and just continue to let that cook for just about 5 minutes or so. And then to plate this, I just put a little of the cauliflower rice on the bottom, topped it with a little bit of the Korean ground beef. I did slice up a little cucumber to go on the side, sprinkled some sesame seeds on it, and some chopped green onions. So there you go, guys. That's this week's Keto Dinner Ideas video. I hope that you enjoyed it. Again, if you have any suggestions of meals that you would like to see us try, recipes you'd like to see us try, please comment down below and leave those suggestions. As always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, bye guys.